Ethan Carter had spent 3 years perfecting the art of not being seen. Not literally. He showed up, did his work, contributed in meetings when contribution was required. But he had developed, over 3 years at Lockhart Dynamics, a specific and reliable skill: the ability to be in a building with Patricia Lockhart, the company's CEO, without ever actually crossing her path. He took the stairs when she was known to use the elevator. He scheduled his lunch around her calendar, which his coworkers had unofficially mapped with the precision of meteorologists tracking a storm system. He had, on 3 separate occasions, ducked into a supply closet rather than share a hallway with her. It wasn't personal. Patricia Lockhart was, by every account circulating through Lockhart Dynamics, brilliant, exacting, and entirely unforgiving of mediocrity. People who impressed her thrived. People who didn't last. Ethan had decided, 3 years ago, that the safest position was to never be tested. So when his friend Marcus set him up on a blind date, insisting, with the specific confidence of someone who has clearly already decided this is a good idea regardless of input, Ethan had agreed mostly because saying no required more energy than saying yes. He arrived at the restaurant 7 minutes early. He was reviewing the table layout, deciding where to sit, when the door opened, and Patricia Lockhart walked in. She was not dressed for the office. She looked directly at him. She smiled, an actual smile, the kind he had never once seen cross her face in 3 years of careful avoidance. She walked to his table. She sat down, and before he could find a single word, she said the thing that was going to completely rearrange everything he thought he understood about the past 3 years of his life. Please like this video. Those likes matter so much for stories like this. Hit the button, subscribe too. It's completely free. Drop a comment, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let me tell you what she said. Ethan Carter was 29 years old and worked in operations analysis at Lockhart Dynamics, a logistics and supply chain technology company that had grown, under Patricia's leadership, from a regional firm into a national name. He was good at his job, in the specific, quiet way that doesn't generate headlines. He noticed things, inefficiencies that other people had stopped seeing because they had stopped looking. Problems that nobody had assigned to him, but that he fixed anyway because leaving them broken felt worse than the extra hours required to fix them. He stayed late often. Not performatively. Nobody saw him do it except the building's cleaning staff, who he had learned the names of and asked about their weekends, which was more attention than most of his colleagues paid them. He helped co-workers who were struggling with projects that weren't his responsibility. He did this without telling anyone, without claiming credit, without expecting it to be noticed. He had never once thought this made him remarkable. He had thought it made him exactly the kind of person who stayed invisible, which was, as far as he understood the company's culture, the safest possible position. He had decided 3 years ago when he watched Patricia Lockhart terminate a department head in a meeting with 7 words and complete composure that visibility was a risk he didn't need to take. Patricia Lockhart was 36 and had inherited a company that was struggling and turned it, over 8 years, into something that mattered in its industry. She was exactly as exacting as her reputation suggested. She did not tolerate excuses. She had built her standards through the specific discipline of someone who understood that the alternative to high standards was a slow, comfortable decline. And she had watched that decline happen to her father's company before she took it over, and had decided, with total clarity, that it would never happen again under her leadership. She was also, behind the reputation, lonely in the specific way that successful people are sometimes lonely, surrounded by people who wanted things from her, who performed versions of themselves calibrated to what they thought she wanted to see, who treated every interaction with her as a transaction with stakes. She had noticed Ethan Carter 8 months before the blind date, not because anyone had pointed him out, because she had been reviewing department efficiency metrics and noticed a pattern of quiet improvements that traced back, consistently, to a name she didn't immediately recognize. She had looked into it. What she found was a man who solved problems and never mentioned solving them, who stayed late not for visibility, but because the work mattered to him, who had, on at least 4 occasions documented in internal records, helped colleagues complete projects under deadline pressure without ever putting his own name on the credit line. She had also noticed, with the specific dry amusement of someone who understood her own reputation, that this man appeared to actively avoid being in the same room as her. She found this, more than anything else about him, genuinely interesting. Everyone else in her professional orbit wanted proximity to her. He wanted distance. She wanted to know why. She had arranged the blind date through Marcus, a friend of Ethan's who, it turned out, was also a friend of Patricia's from a community board they both sat on. Patricia had not told Marcus the full reason. She had simply asked, with the specific authority that made most requests of hers feel less like requests and more like instructions, to be introduced to a colleague she found interesting, whose name she preferred Marcus keep to himself until the table. Marcus had thought it was an unusual request. He had also not questioned it, because questioning Patricia Lockhart was not something most people in her orbit did casually. He had told Ethan he had someone special in mind. He had not mentioned a name. Patricia told him everything within the first 15 minutes, not because she planned to drag the reveal out, but because she had decided, somewhere in the cab on the way over, that the situation required honesty rather than performance. She told him she had arranged the date. She told him why. She described, with the specific precision that defined everything she did, the pattern she had noticed in the efficiency reports. The late nights, the unclaimed help, the consistent, quiet competence that never once asked to be seen. She told him she had spent 3 years being surrounded by people who wanted her attention, her money, her position, and that watching someone actively avoid all 3 had been, professionally and personally, the most refreshing thing she had encountered in years. Ethan sat across from her, processing the collapse of 3 years of careful avoidance into a single dinner. He asked the only question that mattered to him in that moment. He asked if this was a test. She said it wasn't. He asked if dinner with the CEO of his company, arranged secretly, after 3 years of him deliberately avoiding her, could possibly be anything other than complicated. She said it could be exactly what it looked like, 2 people having dinner. He pointed out that nothing about their situation looked like 2 ordinary people having dinner. She laughed, the genuine kind, which he had also never witnessed in 3 years. She said he was right, but she said she was tired of everything in her life being complicated by what she was, instead of who she was, and that she had decided, watching the way he worked from a distance for 8 months, that he might be one of the few people who could actually separate the 2. He thought about that for a long moment. He decided to stay for dinner. The dinner ran 3 hours. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Lockhart Dynamics. Books, a hiking trip she had taken alone 2 years ago that nobody at the company knew about, the specific stress of growing up as an only child, expected to inherit something significant before she was old enough to want it. He told her about his own family, modest, unremarkable in the way that he found comforting rather than limiting. He told her about why he had decided, 3 years ago, that staying out of her path was the smartest professional decision available to him. She told him that decision had been, indirectly, the reason she was sitting across from him now. He found this both flattering and slightly terrifying. By the end of dinner, neither of those feelings had fully resolved, but something else had been added to them that made the unresolved feelings easier to sit with. Please like this video. I'm asking you. Those likes matter so much for stories like this. Hit the button. Subscribe if you haven't. Free. Drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? Now the part where it gets complicated at the office. Word moved quickly once Ethan and Patricia stopped being careful about being seen together. Not because either of them announced anything, but because a company is, structurally, a machine for noticing things, and the CEO having dinner with an operations analyst twice in 1 month was the kind of thing that generates its own momentum regardless of intention. The board found out within 6 weeks. The conversation that followed was not subtle. 2 senior board members requested a private meeting with Patricia, framed carefully as a discussion of organizational risk. They cited concerns about perceived favoritism, about the optics of a relationship between the CEO and a subordinate employee, about the specific exposure the company faced if the relationship complicated future decisions about Ethan's role or compensation. They were not entirely wrong about the risks. They were also, Patricia understood clearly, protecting something else: the specific comfort of a board that preferred their CEO to remain exactly as unreachable and singularly focused on the company as she had been for 8 years. She listened to their concerns. She did not argue with the legitimate parts of them. She also did not agree to end something that had nothing to do with the company's organizational risk and everything to do with the first genuinely uncomplicated relationship she had encountered in a decade. She proposed a solution instead. The solution was structural. Ethan would move out of any reporting line that connected to Patricia directly, a transfer that was, conveniently and not coincidentally, aligned with an idea he had been developing for over a year that nobody had taken seriously enough to fund. The idea was a predictive logistics optimization division, using the pattern recognition skills Ethan had been applying informally to individual projects and scaling them into a formal analytical product that Lockhart Dynamics could offer as a service rather than just an internal efficiency tool. He had pitched a version of this idea 18 months earlier. It had been declined, not because it was bad, but because the executive who reviewed it had not understood it fully and hadn't taken the time to. Patricia read the original pitch deck, which Ethan still had, slightly embarrassed, saved on an old laptop. She read it twice. She said, "This should have been funded the first time." He said, "Nobody thought it was worth the risk." She said, "I think the risk was in not funding it." The new division launched 4 months later, with Ethan as its lead, and a small team, built specifically around the capability he had been quietly demonstrating, uncredited, for 3 years. It was structured entirely separately from Patricia's direct reporting chain, a deliberate firewall that addressed the board's legitimate concerns, while allowing both the relationship and the business opportunity to develop on their own merits. The board, watching the structural separation and unable to identify a continuing organizational risk, stopped raising the objection. The division's first quarter exceeded every internal projection. The second quarter exceeded the first. By the end of the first year, the Predictive Logistics division had become one of the most profitable units in the company, built on an idea that had been sitting, ignored, on an old laptop for 18 months, because nobody had bothered to look closely enough.